This is Dr. Flight, and we're going to spend a couple minutes talking about descriptive analysis to summarize data. And so what we'll mostly focus on will be measures of central tendency and then also dispersion. So generally speaking, if you have a data set and you simply want to describe the variables, then depending on your data type, you'll want to describe things like or report things like the mean, median, mode, and then things like measures of dispersion like the range or maybe variance. Okay, so that's what we'll look at as we move forward here. And we'll talk about 4 functions then of descriptive analysis. So again, we're not showing relationships between variables, but we just want to give a snapshot, if you will, of the data that we have. So summarizing the data would be one of the objectives that we'd have here. We simply want to summarize the data where we want to put into numbers what the general snapshot is telling us. We want to apply basic techniques where we can take the summary of the data and display it maybe through some type of a relationship or a graph. So you might show, for instance, if you have different groups of consumers and this is something that you measured, you might show or illustrate how these different groups of respondents relate to each other, maybe in size, like one group is much larger than the other or smaller than the other. One behaves in a different way than the others do. So maybe, again, apply what we understand to the context of the listener or the respondent. Communicate, so certainly communicate patterns in the data and generalize kind of in a broad sense, what the data is reflecting in the marketplace. Okay, so generally speaking, we want to give an overview of the data. We want to put it into the context that the listener or the client is going to appreciate, and go from there. Okay, so descriptive analysis then, if we're going to use that term as something, then it's when we want to describe a typical or average respondent. So if you remember, there are 3 different types of research that we typically try to pursue. One is exploratory research. This type of research, second, is descriptive research. So when we summarize data, we're very often describing the typical respondent, only we're doing it statistically. So that's kind of where our point of reference is. So data summarization then, it's a process of describing data by computing a small number of measures. So we don't have to have lots of measures. In fact, you'll know that when we take an average, that's a pretty simple data point, right? We just take the total sum of some group and then divide it by the number of respondents, and we have that average if we're going to do something like that. So so these aren't like obnoxiously difficult, but it condenses our concept and it allows us to take volumes of data and express them in very simple terms. So some of these, again, might be a count, a simple count, or a frequency of occurrence, measures of central tendency, dispersions, or the spread of the data, like the range. And then finally, we might think of the shape of the data. And it's really the shape of the distribution that we sometimes look at. And we'll talk about that here as we move forward. Okay, so again, here as we kind of do this, measures of occurrence will be things like how often something is reported. So just simply a count. If we have nominal data This would be something that we would typically report. We might also report the frequency by either percentage or just the frequency, which is how many times something happens as well. So frequency and count are, they're not synonymous, but they're close enough, right? So if you have, for instance, customers who, some of whom come into the store to buy, some of whom shop online, then over a given period of time, we might simply count out of our total number of customers, how many count-wise, did the online shopping versus the in-store shopping. We could also convert that into a percentage, of course, if we wanted to as well. Okay, so simply occurrence, like how often did the event occur, is a measure of simplicity, simple reporting thing that we would do. Typical averages or events that happen on a regular basis might be something we measure with central tendency. So mean, median, and mode are the things that we would typically look at there. Now, again, these are all things you probably calculate on your own. And that would be fine. A software though that you use would make perfect sense with it as well. So mean, median, mode. Remember, the mean is the sum of the total, the sum total, and then divided by the number of cases, right? So we should be able to report those as appropriate based on the data type. And then we took a look at variability. Okay, so that's kind of the second piece here. So variability, or the dispersion of the data, tells how spread out the data is. So range is the easiest way to think about this. We might think about frequency distributions if we have, like for instance, the percentage of people who came in versus the percentage who didn't. Something like that. How often a choice is made, whether it's made a lot or a little, and the spread of choice across a group of selections might be something that we do. So moving beyond nominal data though, and some degree interval data, we get into this or ordinal data. We get into larger data, which is metric, where we can have a greater spread, and that might be something like range. So like age, for instance, we might not know the range of age. If the age of respondents are, say, 20 years old to 88, then that's a pretty wide range compared to if our respondents were like between 25 and 35, that's a much narrower range. And it tells us something about the dispersion of that particular metric, that particular measure. Standard deviation and variance, they're both related, of course. Standard deviation is going to, again, it's going to tell us the spread of the data. We typically think of standard deviations and variance occurring, and standard deviations in particular occurring when we start looking at the shape of the distribution. And so this might be like if we have, again, a bell curve, but it's really, really elongated or spread out, that would be a very wide standard deviation. We look at standard deviation, we're looking at a set percentage of respondents that fall within a distance from the mean, from the average. So again, if that standard deviation is larger, it means that a greater percentage of respondents fall across a wider range on either side of the mean, on the positive side or the negative side. Okay, so again, we have these calculations that you may do by hand, but again, most times we look at these things just with a statistical software package to help us figure out what we're going to do and where we're going to be with things. Okay, so simply stated, when we look at summary statistics of a group of data, these are pretty simple standard things that would be reported. and it's all part of the descriptive portion of descriptive statistics. And we can apply means, measures of central tendency or dispersion or occurrence to a lot of different spaces. Okay, so thanks for listening.